Hi guys, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Marc Zicree of Space Command, and today we're going to talk about politics and science fiction. It's a few days after the election of Donald Trump, and as a liberal, I'm less than thrilled by that, but as the producer of Sliders, I also know that on an alternative Earth, Hillary won, and on another alternative Earth, Bernie won, and but of course, on various other alternative worlds, the Confederacy won and Hitler won. So it all comes out in the wash, I suppose. But again, science fiction has always been an amazing place for political expression, often ahead of its time. And so, for instance, a black president was seen in science fiction long before we saw it in the real world. James Earl Jones starred in The Man, which was a TV movie that Rod Serling wrote about the first black president. And of course, anytime an asteroid was heading toward Earth, or it was the end of the world, you'd have Morgan Freeman or other African American actors. Playing, Danny Glover, etc., playing the president and playing it wonderfully, and of course, in terms of women presidents, there are many expressions in both science fiction literature and science fiction film and TV where you'd have women presidents. One of them, of course, is Battlestar Galactica, which was quite wonderful. And I believe, if memory serves, there was a 1950s film called Project Moonbase. It's one of only two films that Robert A. Heinlein wrote, the other being Destination Moon. And Project Moonbase was actually a TV pilot that didn't go to series, and these were the first two episodes. And it's quite an interesting little film, rather fun. And I believe there was a female president in that as well. But again, science fiction has always been a place where people could express political views, be politically adventurous, get past the censors. This goes all the way back to Gulliver's Travels, and of course 1984 is a great example of that, and Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, where Ray was reacting to the blacklisting of the 1950s, the political conservatism of that era, plus the book burnings that Hitler and the Nazis did in the 40s. And Ray was alarmed by political repression, political censorship, and spoke out in Fahrenheit 451. See, one thing fascinating about science fiction is that often, by taking it out of its literal daily political context, you can address larger issues that people across various political stripes, across boundaries, can recognize and be entertained by and be moved by and perhaps even changed by. Another great example of this is Twilight Zone. Rod Serling was the great writer of television of the 1950s, and yet every time, and he'd won the most Emmys, he was the highest paid, and writing for shows like Playhouse 90 and Studio One, where millions and millions of people. This was when there were only 3 or 4 networks, and so you'd have 45 million people watching a show, if not more. And Rod was very politically committed, and yet when he wanted to write about race or politics, he couldn't even say Democrat or Republican or social issues. He was totally censored. So then he got the idea. He actually said he'd written something about Congress where he literally couldn't say anything about politics, couldn't use the words Democrat or Republican. And later in the press he said, if I'd said this in the 21st century and populated it with robots, I could have gotten my point across better. And so that was the seed that led to Twilight Zone, where Rod was able to write about race and politics and social issues in such great Twilight Zone episodes as Eye of the Beholder, The Obsolete Man, etc., and get his point across incredibly well. And the other part of it that's fascinating is that in science fiction, you might be writing about Joe McCarthy or Nixon or whomever, but because you're not speaking specifically about that, it makes it timeless. So Fahrenheit 451 is every bit as timeless. Twilight Zone is every bit as timeless now. Its point as modern and as contemporary as when it was written 50, 60 years ago. And of course, another great example of political thought in science fiction is Star Trek. Again, Gene Roddenberry wanted to comment on race, wanted to comment on inclusivity, wanted to comment on the Vietnam War and the Cold War, and was able to do it very effectively with the Federation and the Klingons and so forth, less effectively with Frank Gorshin painted half black, half white. But again, in terms of presidents, Abraham Lincoln makes an appearance on Star Trek, again to questionable effect, but still he's there. And so again, and also, science fiction can deal with issues of the underclass, issues of people who are being ill-used, not paid for their labors, etc. So, for instance, right now, today, I'm wearing my button, Equal Rights for Replicants, if you can see that. That was given out in 1982 when Blade Runner came out. And again, Blade Runner deals with many social and political issues of wealth, of class, of slavery in the modern terms with replicants, as we do in Space Command. Space Command makes many political points without beating it over the head or dividing into liberal or conservative camps. It's basically talking about humanity and inclusivity and all of us coming together. So that's something great about science fiction. Now, the other fun thing about science fiction in terms of politics is when I grew up, I was reading voraciously in science fiction all the greats: Robert A. Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, Ray Bradbury, Robert Sheckley, Robert Silverberg, Harlan Ellison, etc. And I was totally unaware, as a kid, reading these books, which I loved, of the political leanings of these authors. I had no idea what their politics were. And the first I became aware of each writer's political stance was during the Vietnam War, which of course polarized people greatly in America and elsewhere. There was a 2-page ad that appeared in one of the science fiction magazines, and it was, I believe, it may have been Galaxy. I'm not certain. I'd have to go back and check. But it was a 2-page ad, and on the left side, basically on one side it was "We support the Vietnam War," and on the other side it was "We oppose the Vietnam War," and had a list of science fiction writers who had signed off on that. And that's when I first became aware that certain writers like Robert Heinlein were on the right, and other writers like Theodore Sturgeon and Harlan Ellison were on the left. And it was amazing to me because then I could go back and look at their work and say, okay, now I see it. And of course, if you read Robert A. Heinlein now, you're very aware of his sort of right-wing libertarian views. And it's fascinating because when Paul Verhoeven did Starship Troopers, he took that book to its extreme and basically made a Nazi science fiction film, or a science fiction film as if the Nazis had made it, using the Nazi uniforms and so forth and taking them to an extreme. And of course, many of Heinlein's fans were outraged by that, as was Heinlein's widow. And yet it's a very entertaining film and very, very fun. And you can, again, take it out of its political context. For instance, when they did a TV series based on Starship Troopers, they removed the political context, and it still worked as just a very fun science fiction film and science fiction project. So, and again, with science fiction, often you can remove the political context and still enjoy the stories. I mean, Fahrenheit 451 is a very entertaining story about a man who decides he wants to stop burning books, and what happens to him when his mind is opened up. It's about the love of books. And when Francois Truffaut made the film of Fahrenheit 451, it comes across the astonishing love of books, the love of having your mind open to other ideas. So again, those of us who read science fiction, who watch science fiction TV and film, regardless of our political beliefs, we can be entertained and moved by the human story, by the individual story, the story of the journey of a man trying to find himself, or a woman trying to find herself. And science fiction has allowed us to also write about issues of gender, issues of sexuality, issues of pretty much anything we want to talk about, stripped of its, as I said, stripped of its day-to-day context. Now, the other fun thing is that science fiction also allows all of us to come together as fans, as writers, as creators, as directors, producers, again, reaching across political and social barriers and boundaries. And so both science fiction and space exploration in the real world is something that we can all celebrate, all come together on, and enjoy and be thrilled about. And it unites us as the human race, apart from whether we're on the right or on the left. And I think that's terrific. I mean, for instance, there are many, many Star Trek fans who are conservative as well as liberal. There are many fans of all of the science fiction stories that we love, and we can celebrate that. It's basically a big tent where we're all welcomed in. There's no political test. There's no test of who you're voting for, that whether you're let in or not. And I think that's terrific. And again, with Space Command, my view is that expanding out into space allows us to put aside our differences, allows us to put aside our hatreds and our pettiness, and do something greater, something bigger, something better for ourselves as a species. And again, the moment that that the astronauts went out into space and turned the camera back on Earth and we saw our planet, and it put things in perspective, that we're all in this together. That was a great moment. And when Elon Musk announced that we were going to send 100 people to Mars within 6 years, I hope he does it. I hope he makes it. But if he doesn't, even the ambition, the aspiration is something that people can get behind and unite behind, regardless of their political beliefs. Because again, this is bigger than that. I mean, we're all here for only a short time, and what we leave behind is what we create, what we build, what we make happen through our will and our endeavors. So I love the fact that I can go to a rocket launch or a science fiction convention, and I'm not asking, what someone's beliefs are. Many of you know that I created a round table of writers and directors and actors and producers. It's thousands of people, offshoots all over the country, and we meet every Thursday night. We met last night, and again, we don't talk about politics, we don't talk about religion, we don't talk about unions, because these are all hot and button issues, but we do talk about how much we care about each other and how much we support each other in achieving our dreams and living lives of meaning. So anyway, so that's it for now, Mr. Sci-Fi. Please subscribe to the Mr. Sci-Fi channel on YouTube. We'll be talking again very, very soon. If you want to have something enjoyable in these days ahead, watch Project Moonbase. It's a lot of fun. It's a goofy little film. And we'll be talking again very, very soon. So thanks a lot, Mr. Sci-Fi, Marc Zicree. Take care and see you next time. Bye-bye.